Charles Leclerc came out of the Belgian Grand Prix with no penalty. Lewis Hamilton came out of it with 5 seconds added to his race. Both of them made contact with a rival. Both incidents went to the same stewards on the same afternoon, judged against the same international sporting code. So why does one of those count as hard racing and the other one counts as a punishable mistake? That question is now heading into a room in Hungary with every driver on the grid sitting in it, and the FIA does not have a clean answer ready. The two rulings sit on the same page of the same rulebook. That is what makes this awkward. This is not one steward in one country reading a regulation differently from another steward somewhere else, months apart, with different footage and different pressure. This is one afternoon, one panel, one set of documents open on the same table, producing two verdicts that pull in opposite directions. And the sport is walking straight into the next race weekend, with that unresolved. The FIA is expected to sit down with the drivers in Hungary for one of the periodic catch-ups where stewarding and driving standards get talked through, and the Belgian Grand Prix is expected to sit near the top of the agenda. Not as a scheduling formality, as the thing everybody in the room already has an opinion about. What makes the Leclerc call the more interesting of the two is that nobody is really arguing he did something outrageous. Drivers defend like that. They have defended like that for as long as there have been long straights and slipstreams. The problem is not what he did. The problem is the reasoning the stewards used to clear him, because that reasoning quietly moved the line every other driver is supposed to race against. And once you move that line without saying so, every defense for the rest of the season gets judged against a standard nobody agreed to. So start where it actually happened, on the fastest stretch of tarmac in Formula 1. The Kemmel Straight is where Spa does its real damage. You come out of the compression through Eau Rouge and Raidillon, the car goes light over the crest, and then the track opens into a long, flat-out run with nothing to do but hold the throttle down and watch the gap behind you close. If a car gets a good exit out of Raidillon, it arrives in your slipstream carrying more speed than you have, and it arrives fast. Kemmel is different from almost every other overtaking spot on the calendar. On most straights, the car behind closes gradually, and both drivers get time to negotiate. Here, the closing rate is enormous because the tow at Spa is one of the strongest anywhere, and it stacks on top of a corner exit that already rewards whoever got the better run. A gap that looks safe at the bottom of the hill is gone by the middle of the straight. The defending driver is trying to solve all of that through a mirror the size of a postcard, at a point on the track where he also has to be thinking about the braking zone that is coming. That is the situation Charles Leclerc finds himself in, with Oscar Piastri behind him. Leclerc does what every driver on that grid is taught to do. He moves to break the tow, he takes the air away from the car behind, and then he moves back toward the racing line to set himself up for the end of the straight. That last part is the part that matters. Coming back across is normal. Coming back across, while another car is already committed to the space you are moving into, is where the rulebook starts having opinions. Piastri is already there, or close enough to it. The two cars touch, wheel to wheel, at the speed the Kemmel Straight generates. Both of them keep going, which is the only reason this is a stewarding conversation and not a much darker one. The stewards look at it, and they decide there is nothing to answer for. No further action and no investigation left hanging over the rest of the race. Leclerc keeps his afternoon, Piastri gets nothing back, and the sport moves on to the next incident. On its own, that verdict is defensible. Hard defending on a straight, contact. Both cars continue. Racing incident, move along. Formula 1 has swallowed that ruling plenty of times and mostly been fine with it. But the stewards did not stop at calling it a racing incident. They explained why, and the explanation is where this stops being a normal Sunday. The reasoning that came out of the steward's room was that Piastri was not sufficiently alongside to complete the overtake. That finding is worth taking apart, because it does not say Leclerc left enough room. It does not say the space was there and Piastri failed to use it properly. It says the McLaren was not far enough up the inside of the Ferrari to have finished the move if the contact had never happened. That is a completely different test, and it is worth being precise about why. Alongside is a fact. At any given instant, either there is a car in the space next to you or there is not. It can be measured off a single frame of footage, and more importantly, it can be seen from inside the cockpit while it is happening. It is the kind of thing a human being traveling at that speed can actually process. Completing an overtake is a prediction. It asks what would have happened next in a version of the race that never took place. Would the McLaren have held that line into the braking zone? Would it have carried enough speed to stay ahead through the corner? Would the Ferrari have got back at it on the exit? Nobody knows, because the contact happened instead. So the test that was applied puts the burden on the overtaking car to have already earned the position before the defending car has any obligation to leave room for it. Under that logic, The defending driver's responsibility does not switch on until the car behind has done enough work to prove it would have got by anyway, which sounds reasonable until you sit in the cockpit and try to use it. A driver on the Kemmel straight has maybe half a second to decide whether the car behind is alongside enough to matter. He is looking at closing speeds that change the gap every tenth, with dirty air moving the back of his car around while setting up for a braking point that does not wait for him. He is not calculating whether the pass would have been completed. Nobody can calculate that. He is deciding one thing, which is whether there is a car there. And that is the version of the rule the drivers have spent years being told to race by. Because there are two documents that govern this, not one, and that is where the whole argument lives. The first is the International Sporting Code, the FIA's foundational rulebook. It sits above everything else, and it describes in general terms what is and is not acceptable when two cars are fighting for the same piece of road. It is deliberately broad because it has to cover every category the FIA runs, from single-seaters to rallying to endurance racing. The second is the Driving Standards Guidelines. That is the more specific document, written with heavy input from the drivers themselves, precisely because everybody was tired of arguing about this exact thing. The guidelines exist to take the general language of the sporting code and turn it into something a driver can actually apply at speed. That origin matters more than it sounds. The drivers did not ask for guidelines because they wanted to be policed harder. They asked because the alternative was worse. Without a written standard, every incident became a negotiation. Every panel of stewards brought its own instincts, and a move that was fine in one country was worth a penalty in the next. What the drivers wanted was not leniency, it was predictability, a line they could see from inside the car. The guidelines are clear about the situation Leclerc was in. A driver who has moved off the racing line to defend, and who then comes back toward it, is required to leave at least one car width for a car that is there. Not a car that has earned the position. Not a car that has proven the pass would have worked. A car that is there. One car width. That is the standard the drivers helped write. That is the standard they have been coached against, penalized against, and have argued about in stewards' rooms for seasons now. It is the single most repeated instruction in modern wheel-to-wheel racing, and every driver on that grid could recite it from memory. So the sporting code says one thing about racing room in broad terms. The guidelines say a specific thing about car width when you come back toward the line. And the verdict at Spa turned on neither of those. It turned on whether the overtake could have been completed. That is 3 different tests for one piece of contact, and the drivers are expected to race against all of them at the same time. The case being made against the Leclerc verdict is not that the stewards were biased or lazy. It is narrower and more uncomfortable than that. It is that the reasoning answered the wrong question. Whether Piastri could have completed the move is a question about outcome. Whether Leclerc left a car width is a question about conduct. The guidelines were written to police conduct, precisely because outcome is unknowable in the moment, and conduct is not. A driver can control whether he leaves room. He cannot control whether the car behind would have made the corner stick 2 seconds later. And once you start judging conduct by outcome, the version you have heard about how this rule works stops being the version that gets applied. The standard becomes retrospective. Did the pass look like it was going to work? If yes, you owed him room. If no, you did not. That is not a rule a driver can use. That is a rule a driver can only find out about afterwards. There is a second problem underneath it, and it is the one that should be making sporting directors uneasy. A no-action verdict is not just a decision about one afternoon, it is a marker. Every driver, every race engineer, and every team boss watched what happened on the Kemmel straight and watched what the stewards did about it, and they all drew the same conclusion, which is that this is now allowed. Nobody is going to defend less aggressively after that ruling. They are going to defend more aggressively. And they are going to do it at Monza, at Baku, at every circuit where a long straight turns a slipstream into a weapon. Think about what that does to the incentives. Under the guidelines as written, a defending driver who squeezes a rival is taking a risk, because if the other car is there, that is a penalty. Under the reasoning used at Spa, that same squeeze is close to free. If the contact stops the pass from being completed, the pass was never going to be completed, and the defense gets validated by the contact it caused. That is the loop nobody in the paddock wants to say out loud, and it is the loop the drivers are carrying into Hungary. While the argument about the Kemmel straight was still forming, the other half of the problem had already happened, one lap into the same race. Lap 1 at Spa is its own kind of chaos. The field is still bunched, tyres are cold, brakes are cold, and the run down to the first corners squeezes a full grid into a space that only really works for a fraction of it. Lewis Hamilton and George Russell end up in the same piece of it. Hamilton understeers. The front of the car does not turn as much as he has asked it to. The Ferrari runs wider than he wants, and it makes contact with the Mercedes. The stewards look at that one too, and this time they act. 5 seconds, added to Hamilton's race, with the blame placed on him. Now hold those two decisions next to each other, because that is what the drivers are going to do in Budapest. In one incident, a driver actively moves back across the track toward a car that is already there. Contact follows, and the finding is that there is nothing to answer for. In the other, a driver's front end washes out in the opening lap scramble, contact follows, and the finding is that it is his fault and it is worth 5 seconds. One of those involves a deliberate change of direction. The other involves a car not doing what the driver asked it to do. And the one with the deliberate change of direction is the one that walked away clean. The argument against the Hamilton penalty is not that contact never happened or that he had nothing to do with it. He did. His car went where it should not have gone, and it hit another car. The argument is about how much of that belongs to him. Understeer on a cold front tyre on the opening lap is close to the most ordinary thing that happens in Formula One. It is not a decision. It is a car reaching the limit of its front grip at the exact moment there is no room to absorb the mistake. Every driver on the grid has done it, and most of them have done it at Spa, where the opening lap turns into a funnel and there is nowhere to put a car that is running wide. Which is why the case being made is that this one sat closer to a racing incident than a punishable error, and that putting the full weight of it on Hamilton reads heavy. Not outrageous, and not corrupt, just heavy. Heavy is enough to matter, because 5 seconds is not a symbolic slap, it is track position. And track position is what results are built out of. There is a detail in all of this that is easy to skip past, and it sharpens the whole thing considerably. Leclerc and Hamilton are teammates. Same team, same garage, same afternoon, same stewards, two opposite outcomes. It removes the easiest explanation anybody could reach for. This is not a case of one team being treated differently from another, because it is the same team on both sides of the split. Whatever produced the gap between those two verdicts, it was not about the badge on the car. It also means Ferrari spent the same Sunday arguing two contradictory positions. On one side of the garage, a defense on a straight that ended in contact was clean racing that deserved no action. On the other side, contact caused by a front end that would not turn was worth a penalty. Both of those cases had to be made by the same people, to the same stewards, within a few hours of each other. It is an uncomfortable place for any team to be, and it is a preview of what the whole grid is walking into. If a rulebook can split a single team's afternoon in two directions, it can split anybody's. Take the two rulings together and you get the thing that actually has the drivers frustrated. It is not that either verdict is impossible to defend on its own. Each one has a version of the rulebook that supports it. No single reading of the rulebook supports both. If the standard is racing room, Leclerc has a case to answer and Hamilton has a defense, because a car that understeers is a car that did not choose its line. If the standard is intent, Hamilton has a case to answer, and Leclerc has a much bigger one, because moving back across the track is the definition of a chosen line. If the standard is whether the overtake could have been completed, then Leclerc is clear, and there is no obvious reason that same test was not applied to the contact on lap 1. 3 tests, 2 verdicts, 1 afternoon. Pick any single standard and apply it honestly to both incidents, and you do not arrive at the outcomes the sport actually got. None of which is really an argument about the stewards, and that is worth saying plainly. The people in that room are working from limited camera angles, under time pressure, on incidents that unfold in fractions of a second, with two teams presenting opposite versions of the same footage. They are asked to be consistent across a whole season, while being handed a different set of circumstances every single time. What they are not given is one document that answers the question. They are given a broad sporting code and a specific set of guidelines, and when those two do not line up, somebody in that room has to bridge the gap with judgment. That is exactly what happened at Spa. The bridge they built was the completion test, and it is not written down anywhere the drivers can read it. Which means the fix is not better stewards, it is a clearer instruction for the ones already doing the job. For the drivers, this is not a debating point, it is an operating problem. A driver defending on a straight has to make a call in the time it takes to blink. What he needs is one rule, stated once, that he can apply without knowing how it turns out. Leave a car width. Do not move under braking. Do not force a car off the road. Those instructions work because they are about what you do, not about what happens next. The moment the standard becomes a judgment about whether a move would have worked, the driver has nothing to hold on to. He guesses. And the driver who guesses on the aggressive side gets rewarded, until one weekend he does not, and then he is the one in the steward's office asking why the same defense that was fine at Spa is worth a penalty somewhere else. That uncertainty is not neutral. It pushes the racing in one direction, and that direction is more contact, not less. Which brings all of it into Hungary. The FIA and the drivers are expected to sit down during the Hungarian Grand Prix weekend, and stewarding and driving standards are expected to be the centre of it. The Belgian Grand Prix is what everyone is bringing into the room, but the two incidents are not really the point. The point is the question underneath them. How do the International Sporting Code and the Driving Standards Guidelines fit together when they pull in different directions? Which one wins? And when the reasoning behind a verdict appears in neither of them, what exactly are the drivers supposed to race against? There is a version of that meeting that solves nothing, and everyone in the paddock has seen it before. The drivers raise it, the FIA listens, everybody leaves with a shared understanding of how the rule is meant to work, and none of that understanding gets written into either document. Then the next contact happens at Monza. A different panel of stewards looks at it, and the shared understanding from Budapest is not in front of them because it was never written down. What the drivers want out of that meeting is not an apology for Spa. It is a sentence they can use. Something specific enough that a driver on the Kemmel straight, with a car in his mirrors and half a second to decide, knows what he owes the man behind him before the contact, rather than after it. Whether the FIA can give them that is the open question, because the honest answer is that broad language exists for a reason. A rulebook that tries to describe every possible piece of contact ends up describing none of them. But guidelines that get overridden by reasoning nobody can find in the text are worse than broad. They are unpredictable, and unpredictable is the one thing drivers cannot race against. So the real question is not which of the two Spa verdicts was wrong. It is whether Formula One is still being judged by a written standard at all, or by whichever reading of it happens to be in the room that weekend. Because a rule that changes depending on who is looking at it is not really a rule. It is an opinion with a penalty attached. The drivers know that. The FIA knows they know it. And in Hungary, they all have to sit in the same room and say it out loud. Whatever comes out of that meeting will be racing on track by Sunday.